The unauthorized structure at the rear of your property is in clear violation of the community guidelines. Section 3, Article 5.
As per Section 4, Article 3 of the Covenants, this unauthorized structure must be removed within 30 days.
The first time I realized my neighbor and the HOA were working together to destroy me, it was not in a courtroom, not in a board meeting, and not during some dramatic public confrontation. It was at 6:04 in the morning, when someone started pounding on my front door hard enough to shake the glass. I opened it still half awake, wearing an old sweatshirt and holding my phone in one hand, and found 3 people standing on my porch like they had already decided I was guilty. Mary Ann Cole, the HOA president, stood in front with a folder pressed against her chest. Beside her was a board member I barely knew. Behind them, leaning near the edge of my walkway with a look of quiet satisfaction, was my back neighbor, Derek Lawson. Mary Ann handed me a violation notice before I could even ask what was going on. The paper said I was being held responsible for damage to the retaining wall behind my property. The amount listed near the bottom made my stomach drop: $18,700. The notice claimed that runoff from my yard had caused a section of the wall to collapse overnight. It also said the HOA had witness statements, photographs, and contractor notes showing that I had interfered with the common area drainage. If I did not pay within 10 days, they would begin the process of placing a lien against my home. I stood there reading the page while Derek watched me from the sidewalk. He looked calm, too calm, like a man watching a trap finally close. The worst part was not the money, it was the way they had already built the story around me before I had even seen the damage. According to their notice, I had a history of resisting HOA maintenance decisions. I had created problems for the board. I had ignored warnings. They had turned my questions at previous meetings into evidence of motive. Within minutes, neighbors were slowing down on their morning walks, staring toward my porch. Mary Ann kept her voice controlled, but loud enough for everyone nearby to understand the message. I was not just being fined. I was being publicly marked as the person who broke something expensive and refused to take responsibility. I wanted to defend myself right there. I wanted to tell them I had not touched that wall, had not gone near the common area, and had not even stepped into my backyard the night before. But something about the timing felt wrong. The folder was too organized. The amount was too specific. Derek looked too pleased. Then Mary Ann pulled out one of their so-called evidence photos. It showed the collapsed retaining wall, the muddy ground, and the corner of my backyard fence. At first, I stared at the damage. Then my eyes moved to the upper right corner of the image, where a small black shape was mounted under my back eave. My security camera. They had taken a photo of the scene without realizing that my camera had been pointed at that exact wall all night. My name is Rachel Morgan, and until that morning, I had never thought of myself as the kind of person who ended up in a fight with an HOA. I was not rich, not powerful, and not looking for attention. I was a 43-year-old freelance bookkeeper who worked from a small office at the front of my house, drank too much coffee, and liked the kind of quiet neighborhood where people waved from their driveways but did not get involved in each other's lives. I bought that house after my divorce, using almost every dollar I had saved. It was not a mansion. It was a single-story home with pale siding, an old maple tree near the curb, and a narrow backyard that backed up to a landscaped common area. But to me, it represented something I had not felt in years: stability. Every room had been painted by my own hands. Every repair had been paid for carefully, month by month. That house was not just property on a county record. It was the first place in my adult life that felt completely mine. The backyard mattered most. My mother had passed away 2 years before I moved in, and I brought several of her ceramic planters with me. I lined them along the back fence and filled them with lavender, rosemary, and small white flowers she used to love. On stressful days, I would sit out there after work, listen to the sprinklers ticking in the distance, and remind myself that peace did not have to be loud to be real. That was also why I installed the camera under the back eave. A few months after I moved in, some garden tools disappeared from my patio. Nothing expensive, but enough to make me uncomfortable. I bought a basic security system, mounted one camera over the driveway and another facing the backyard, and then mostly forgot about it. It was not there because I expected a conspiracy. It was there because I lived alone, and feeling safe inside my own home mattered. For a while I tried to stay invisible to the HOA. I paid my dues on time. I trimmed my hedges. I submitted paint samples before touching the shutters. I did everything homeowners are told to do if they want to avoid becoming a target. But that changed when the board announced a landscaping improvement project behind our row of homes. The project included repairs to the old retaining wall, new drainage work, and fresh plants near the common walking path. At first, I supported it. Then I saw the budget. The estimated cost had jumped from under $10,000 to almost $30,000, with very little explanation. At the next public meeting, I asked why the number had tripled, whether there were competing bids, and whether the retaining wall had ever been inspected by the county. I was polite, but the room changed the moment I asked those questions. Mary Ann Cole, the HOA president, smiled at me in the way people smile when they are trying not to show anger. Derek Lawson, my back neighbor and one of her closest allies, turned in his chair and looked at me like I had embarrassed the wrong people. Derek had been pushing that project harder than anyone because he planned to sell his house, and a freshly landscaped common area would make his listing look better. After that meeting, small things started happening. I received a warning about my trash bin being visible from the street, even though it had only been out for pickup. I got an email about weeds along my fence line that were actually on the HOA's side of the property. At board meetings, Mary Ann stopped calling on me until the end, when everyone was already tired. Derek stopped waving when I passed him near the mailboxes. I told myself it was nothing. I told myself adults did not punish someone just for asking about money. But if you have ever dealt with a neighbor or an HOA that treats basic questions like personal attacks, you know how quickly silence can turn into pressure. And if this story sounds familiar, leave your thoughts, because sometimes the people who smile the most in public are the same ones building a case against you in private. 2 weeks before the retaining wall collapsed, I was watering my plants near the back fence when I heard voices on the other side. I could not see them clearly through the shrubs, but I recognized Derek's low voice and Mary Ann's sharper one. They were talking about the budget, the wall, and the complaints I had raised. Then Derek said something that made my hand freeze on the hose. He said that if I would not stop digging, they would find a way to make me pay for it. At the time, I thought he meant politically, maybe another fine or another nasty email. I had no idea he meant it literally. The retaining wall collapsed on a Thursday night, after a rainstorm so light it barely left puddles in the street. I remember noticing the weather because I had checked the backyard before going to bed. The planters were fine, the fence line was quiet, and the common area behind my house looked exactly the way it always did, under the pale glow of the path lights. Nothing seemed damaged, nothing seemed dangerous. Nothing gave me the feeling that by morning I would be standing on my porch being accused of causing nearly $20,000 in damage. When Mary Ann left that violation notice in my hands, I walked straight through the house and out the back door. The air still smelled damp, but not like a real storm had passed through. Behind my fence, a section of the retaining wall had given way near the drainage bed. Mud had spilled across the common area, and part of the decorative stone border had shifted downward. It looked bad, but it did not look like something that had suddenly happened because of rain from my small backyard. Before I could take more than a few photos, Derek appeared on the other side of the fence. He had the strange confidence of someone who had been waiting for me to come outside. He told Mary Ann and the board member that he had seen activity near my yard the night before. He said I had been messing around near the drainage line. He said my refusal to cooperate with the landscaping project had finally turned into real damage. He did not have to raise his voice very much. His words were aimed at the people gathering behind him, not at me. I tried to explain that I had not gone into the backyard after dinner. I had not touched the fence. I had not touched the drainage. I had not even known the wall had collapsed until they appeared at my door. But every sentence I spoke seemed to slide off them like they had already rehearsed how to ignore it. Mary Ann said the HOA had enough preliminary information to hold me financially responsible. She said the board had a duty to protect the association from negligent homeowners. She said their contractor had already reviewed the site and believed the water flow came from my side of the property. The way she said it made it clear that the decision had been made before the inspection, before the photos, and before I ever had a chance to respond. By 8 o'clock, a white contractor truck had pulled up near the common path. 2 men in work boots stepped out with clipboards and orange marking flags. One of them came right up to my back fence and started taking pictures over it. Then he opened the side gate that led into my yard. I told him he did not have permission to enter my property. He barely looked at me. He said the HOA had authorized access because the area was connected to common maintenance. He walked across my grass anyway, took pictures of my planters, my hose, the slope of my yard, and the downspout near the back corner of the house. Every click of his camera felt like another piece of a story they were building without my consent. When I stepped in front of him, he finally stopped, but only long enough to say that refusing access would be noted in the report. That was when I understood the trap better. If I let them in, they would use my yard to support their claim. If I told them to leave, they would call me uncooperative. Either way, they had already created a box around me. By noon, the first email arrived. It was addressed to the entire board, with me copied at the bottom like an afterthought. Mary Ann wrote that the damage appeared to be tied to drainage interference from my property, and that my prior objections to the retaining wall project created concern about intentional or negligent conduct. Derek responded less than 10 minutes later, confirming that he had personally observed suspicious activity near my fence line. Another board member replied that the HOA should move quickly before I had time to alter the scene. That sentence made my hands go cold. Alter the scene. They were not investigating. They were accusing me of covering something up before I even knew what I was supposedly covering. Later that afternoon, Derek stood near the end of my driveway while I was bringing in the mail. A few neighbors were outside, close enough to hear him but far enough to pretend they were not listening. He said I had always thought I was smarter than the board because I asked about bylaws and budgets. He said paperwork would not save me this time. Then he looked toward my house and said that some people only learned respect when the cost became personal. I did not answer. I wanted to, but something in me had gone very still. The more Derek talked, the more certain I became that this was bigger than a broken wall. The speed of the notice, the exact dollar amount, the contractor entering my yard, the email language, the way Derek kept performing for an audience. None of it felt accidental. That evening, another notice was taped to my door. It warned that failure to cooperate with the HOA's investigation could result in additional fines, legal fees, and a lien process against my home. They gave me 10 days to accept responsibility or dispute the charge in writing, but the wording made the dispute process sound like a formality. They were not asking what happened. They were telling me what version of the story they planned to use. I sat at my kitchen table with the papers spread out in front of me. The violation notice, the printed email, the photos I had taken of the wall, the contractor's muddy boot prints still visible in my grass. For a few minutes, fear got the better of me. $18,700 was not a number I could simply absorb. A lien against my home could damage the only stable thing I had rebuilt after my divorce. And worst of all, the neighborhood was already starting to look at me like I had done something wrong. Then I remembered the small black camera under the back eave. I had installed it months earlier and barely checked it since. I opened my laptop, logged into the security app, and pulled up the backyard feed from the night before. The timeline loaded slowly, frame by frame, until I reached the early morning hours. At 2:13 a.m., motion detection had triggered near the retaining wall. I expected to see rain, maybe an animal, maybe nothing useful at all. Instead, the screen showed Derek walking through the common area behind my fence. A few seconds later, another figure appeared beside him, wearing a hooded rain jacket with the logo of the HOA's landscaping company on the back. I did not run outside. I did not call Derek. I did not email Marianne in anger. For almost a full minute, I just sat in front of my laptop and watched the footage, with my hands resting flat on the kitchen table, trying to slow my breathing enough to understand what I was seeing. Derek was behind my fence at 2:13 in the morning. He was not walking a dog. He was not passing through by accident. He moved with purpose, staying close to the retaining wall and looking back twice toward the row of houses. The man with him wore a dark rain jacket, and when he turned, the landscaping company's logo flashed clearly across his back. It was the same company the HOA claimed had already inspected the damage that morning. I replayed the clip again, then again. The two of them carried something from the path and placed it near the base of the wall. A few minutes later, the contractor knelt beside the drainage bed and started working around the pipe with a small shovel. Derek stood over him, pointing at the ground and then toward my fence. They were not repairing anything. They were disturbing the area before the wall failed. At 2:47, the contractor removed a short section of flexible drainage pipe and set it aside near the shrubs. At 3:06, both men stepped back as water began pooling at the base of the retaining wall from the common area sprinkler line. It did not come from my yard. It did not come from my hose. It came from the HOA-maintained landscaping system behind the fence. I copied the entire video file to an external hard drive. Then I uploaded it to cloud storage, saved another copy on a thumb drive, and emailed the file to myself with the subject line showing the date and time. I had never imagined I would need to preserve security footage like evidence, but every instinct told me that if I confronted them too soon, the story would change before I could prove the original lie. After that, I started building a folder. I saved the violation notice. I printed Marianne's email to the board. I took photos of the contractor's boot prints in my grass, the open side gate, the damage behind the fence, and the downspout they were trying to blame. I photographed my hose exactly where it had been coiled against the wall of my house, dry underneath and untouched. I wrote down the time Marianne had arrived, the time the contractor entered my yard, and every person who had been standing close enough to hear Derek accuse me. Then I pulled out the closing documents from when I bought the house. The survey was still in a blue folder with my mortgage paperwork. I spread it across the dining room table and traced the property line with my finger. The retaining wall was not on my lot. It sat behind the rear boundary, inside the common area maintained by the HOA. My yard sloped slightly toward the back fence, but the drainage easement behind the property was designed to carry water away through the HOA's system, not through mine. The next morning, I called the county clerk's office and requested every public record tied to the retaining wall and the landscaping project. I asked for permits, inspection history, drainage plans, and any recent applications submitted by the HOA. The woman on the phone was polite, but after a few minutes of searching, her tone changed. She told me she could find an old permit from years earlier, when the original wall had been built, but nothing recent for structural repair, drainage modification, or excavation. That mattered. The HOA had been telling homeowners that the wall project was routine maintenance, but the footage showed someone interfering with drainage, and the county had no record of a current permit for that kind of work. If the wall had been unstable, the board had ignored it. If the drainage had been changed, someone had done it without proper approval. Either way, it was not a problem they could legally drop in my lap because I had asked inconvenient questions at a meeting. I hired an independent surveyor before responding to the HOA. It cost money I did not want to spend, but it was cheaper than letting them write the facts for me. He came out 2 days later with equipment, flags, and a calm expression that made Derek watch from his deck the entire time. The surveyor confirmed what my documents already showed. The collapsed portion of the retaining wall was outside my property line. The drainage feature Derek had accused me of damaging was part of the HOA's common area. There was no physical evidence that water had been directed from my yard into the wall. I also called my insurance agent. She told me not to admit fault, not to sign anything, and not to speak to the HOA's contractor without written documentation. She explained that when an association tries to assign damage to a homeowner, the cause has to be proven, not assumed. A witness statement from a neighbor with a personal interest was not enough. A contractor hired by the HOA was not neutral, and a demand for payment under threat of a lien was serious enough that I needed an attorney before sending any formal reply. By then, my fear had started turning into something colder and more focused. I was not trying to embarrass anyone. I was not trying to start a war with my neighborhood. I was trying to stop a group of people from pinning their own damage on me because they thought I would panic, pay, and disappear. That evening, I looked again at the photo Marianne had handed me on my porch. Something about it kept bothering me. The angle showed the collapsed wall, but the mud pattern looked different from what I had photographed that morning. I opened the digital copy attached to the HOA email and checked the file information. The timestamp did not match the day of the collapse. The image they were using as evidence against me had been taken 2 days before the retaining wall fell. The attorney I hired was named Daniel Price, and the first thing he told me was not to send a single angry email. He said anger gave people something to use against you. Evidence gave them something to fear. So I sat across from him in a small office above a bank, with my folder of notices, photos, survey records, county emails, and a thumb drive on the table between us, and I watched his expression change as he went through each piece. At first, he was quiet. He read Marianne's violation notice. He read the board emails. He looked at the amount they were demanding, the 10-day deadline, and the lien warning printed in bold near the bottom. Then he opened the survey and placed it beside the HOA's own map of the common area. His pen stopped moving. "This wall is not on your property," he said. I already knew that from the surveyor, but hearing an attorney say it out loud made the room feel different. The HOA had written their demand as if the collapsed retaining wall was somehow my responsibility because it sat near my backyard. But near was not the same as owned. Near was not the same as controlled. And near did not give them the right to turn a common area maintenance failure into a personal debt against me. Daniel moved to the video next. I watched him play the footage from 2:13 a.m. without saying anything. Derek appeared on the screen, then the man in the landscaping jacket, then the shovel, then the removed drainage pipe, then the sprinkler water collecting at the base of the wall. Daniel backed the footage up and played that section again. This time, he leaned closer. "That changes everything," he said. According to him, the HOA had 3 major problems. The first was access. Their contractor had entered my yard without permission, without proper notice, and without any actual emergency that required immediate entry. The HOA could not simply declare my private property part of its investigation because it was convenient. If their contractor opened my gate and walked across my lawn to build a case against me, that was not maintenance, that was trespass. The second problem was responsibility. The retaining wall was listed in the governing documents as a common element. That meant the HOA had a duty to inspect, maintain, and repair it. They could not shift the cost to one homeowner unless they could prove that homeowner directly caused the damage. A neighbor's statement, especially from someone who benefited from blaming me, was not proof. A contractor paid by the HOA was not independent proof, and a photo with a suspicious timestamp was the opposite of proof. The third problem was the most serious. The footage did not just show Derek walking near the wall. It showed Derek and the landscaping contractor interfering with the drainage system before the collapse. If the HOA then used that damage to demand money from me, threaten a lien, and support an insurance claim, they were no longer dealing with a simple property dispute. They were walking dangerously close to false statements, fabricated evidence, and an attempt to shift liability for damage they may have caused themselves. Then I showed Daniel the digital photo metadata. The image Marianne had presented as evidence had been taken 2 days before the wall collapsed. It was not proof of what happened that night. It was proof that someone had been documenting the wall before the supposed emergency, then using the image later to make it look like I had caused sudden damage. Daniel asked me to forward him every email from the HOA. I did. Buried near the bottom of the thread was the mistake that finally exposed the scheme. Marianne had forwarded me a notice without removing the earlier messages between herself, Derek, and the landscaping contractor. It was probably an accident. She had been moving too fast, too confident that I would be scared by the lien threat to read carefully. 3 weeks before the collapse, Derek had written that the wall repair costs would make the board look incompetent if homeowners realized how long the drainage issue had been ignored. Marianne replied that the board needed a recoverable cause before the next budget meeting. Then Derek wrote one sentence that made Daniel stop scrolling. If Rachel keeps digging into the numbers, put the drainage problem on her side and make her own it. There it was. Not a misunderstanding, not a neighbor making a bad assumption, a written plan to make me pay for a problem they already knew existed. Daniel drafted a demand letter that same afternoon. It ordered the HOA to withdraw the $18,700 charge, cancel any lien process, preserve all emails, text messages, invoices, contractor communications, inspection notes, meeting minutes, and insurance records tied to the retaining wall. It warned them not to destroy evidence, not to contact me directly, and not to repeat the accusation to other homeowners. The letter also made clear that if they continued, I was prepared to pursue claims for trespass, defamation, abuse of process, violation of the governing documents, and any damages caused by knowingly false statements. Daniel attached the survey, the county permit response, still frames from the security footage, and a screenshot of the photo metadata. He did not include the full video yet. He wanted to see whether they would lie again in writing. For the first time since Marianne had pounded on my door, I slept through the night. The HOA did not respond for 2 days. Derek stopped walking near my driveway. Marianne stopped sending emails. The silence felt heavy, but it no longer scared me. It felt like the moment before people who had been yelling across a room realized the microphone was on. Then the board scheduled a special meeting and claimed it was to discuss homeowner conduct related to common area damage. Daniel smiled when he saw the notice. He told me to bring the survey, the county records, and the thumb drive. So that evening, while Marianne sat at the front of the clubhouse pretending she still controlled the room, I walked in with my attorney beside me, the truth in my hand, and the security footage they never knew existed. The clubhouse was almost full when we arrived. That alone told me Marianne had expected a performance. She had framed the meeting as a discussion about homeowner conduct, and people had come ready to watch me explain myself. I could feel their eyes following me as Daniel and I walked to the front row. Derek sat near the side wall with his arms folded, pretending he was bored, but his jaw tightened the moment he saw the folder in Daniel's hand. Marianne opened the meeting by saying the board had a duty to protect the association from damage caused by individual homeowners. She spoke in that polished HOA voice that sounded reasonable only if you did not know what had happened behind the fence at 2:13 in the morning. She said emotions were running high. She said false accusations against the board would not be tolerated. Then Daniel stood and asked that every word from that point forward be entered into the official minutes. The room changed immediately. He did not raise his voice. He did not accuse anyone dramatically. He started with the survey. He placed the county map beside the HOA's own governing documents and showed that the collapsed retaining wall sat entirely inside the common area. Then he showed the county clerk's response confirming there was no recent permit for structural repair, drainage modification, or excavation tied to that wall. Marianne tried to interrupt by saying the HOA's contractor had already determined that my yard caused the damage. Daniel asked whether that contractor had entered my property with written permission. She did not answer. He asked whether the board had voted to authorize entry onto my private lot. She looked toward the other board members, and none of them looked back. Then Daniel connected the laptop to the clubhouse screen. The security footage played in front of everyone. Derek appeared behind my fence. The landscaping contractor followed. The room watched them move toward the drainage bed, remove the pipe section, disturb the soil, and leave before the sprinkler water began collecting against the retaining wall. No one whispered. No one coughed. The silence became heavier with every second of video. Derek finally said he had only been inspecting a maintenance concern for the HOA, but Daniel pointed to the timestamp, the missing notice, the lack of permit, and the fact that Derek was not an officer authorized to perform inspections at 2 in the morning. The contractor's logo on the jacket made the issue even worse, because it tied the HOA's hired company directly to the scene before the collapse. By the next week, it was no longer just an HOA dispute. Code enforcement opened a file. A county inspector walked the common area, reviewed the drainage path, and confirmed that the water source was part of the HOA-maintained sprinkler system, not my backyard. He also noted that the retaining wall showed older structural problems the board should have addressed long before it failed. A sheriff's deputy took a report about the unauthorized entry onto my property. He did not turn it into a dramatic scene, but the report mattered because it created an official record that Derek and the contractor had crossed onto my lot without permission. My insurance company also refused to treat the HOA's demand as a valid claim against me after reviewing the survey and the footage. The adjuster wrote that the available evidence did not support the allegation that my property caused the loss. Once the insurance company backed away, the HOA's own attorney stepped in and told the board to stop contacting me directly. That was when the blame started moving around the room. Marianne said she relied on Derek's statement. Derek said he was following the contractor's advice. The contractor said the board had asked them to document a drainage problem before the budget meeting. Every explanation opened another door they did not want opened. At the next public session, a resident stood up and asked why homeowners had been told this was my fault before any independent inspection had been completed. Another asked whether HOA funds had been used to cover up ignored maintenance. Someone else demanded to see the invoices for the retaining wall project. For the first time since I moved into that neighborhood, Marianne did not have an answer ready. The HOA withdrew the $18,700 charge 2 days after the county inspector filed his report. They did not call it an apology at first. They called it an administrative correction, as if a lien threat against my home had been a typo in a newsletter. But Daniel sent one more letter, and after that the wording changed. A formal notice went out to every homeowner stating that I was not responsible for the retaining wall collapse, that no lien would be placed against my property, and that the previous accusation should not be repeated. The HOA also had to reimburse my attorney fees, the independent survey, the inspection costs, and the expense of preserving the security footage. For the first time in weeks, I opened my mailbox without feeling my chest tighten. But the damage did not stop with a corrected notice. The landscaping company lost its contract with the association after county officials confirmed that work had been done outside the proper permit process. Their insurance carrier became involved, and from what I later heard, the company had to answer some very uncomfortable questions about why one of their employees was behind my fence in the middle of the night, interfering with drainage before a wall failed. Derek settled separately. He never admitted in writing that he had planned to frame me, but he agreed to pay for the damage caused by the trespass. the harm to my reputation, and the legal costs tied directly to his statements. The day after the settlement was signed, the for sale sign appeared in his yard. For weeks, he avoided looking toward my house. The man who had once stood at the end of my driveway telling me paperwork would not save me was now selling his home because paperwork had saved me completely. Marianne lasted one more board meeting. By then, homeowners had read enough records to understand that the retaining wall had been neglected for years, the budget had been handled poorly, and the board had tried to make one homeowner carry the blame. A special vote was called. Marianne was removed as HOA president, and 2 other board members resigned before the audit even began. The new board hired a different management company, opened the repair bids to homeowner review, and agreed that no future violation notice involving structural damage could be issued without an independent inspection. I did not cheer when it happened. I did not stand up and make a speech. I sat in the back of the clubhouse, listening quietly as the same room that once expected me to defend myself now demanded answers from the people who had accused me. A few months later, the retaining wall was rebuilt properly, with permits posted in plain view and drainage corrected under county inspection. My backyard looked peaceful again. I planted new lavender in my mother's ceramic pots, replaced the damaged grass near the side gate, and added one more camera facing the common area. Not because I wanted to live suspiciously, but because I had learned that peace sometimes needs a record. The framed survey still sits in my office. Most people would probably think that is strange, but to me, it is a reminder. A property line is not just a line on paper. It is the boundary between what someone can demand from you and what they have no right to touch. I did not win because I yelled louder than the HOA. I did not win because I threatened Derek back or tried to embarrass Marianne online. I won because I did not panic. I did not sign anything. I saved every email, every photo, every notice, every video clip, and every public record. I let the evidence speak in rooms where arrogance had been speaking too long. And if you have ever had a neighbor, an HOA, or anyone with a little authority try to twist the truth against you, remember this. Do not let their confidence make you doubt your facts. Check the records. Save the proof. Know your property line. Because sometimes the person they think is too quiet to fight back is the one with the camera, the survey, and the truth. If this story made you think of someone who needs to hear it, share it with them. Leave a comment with what you would have done in my situation. Save this video in case you ever face something similar. And subscribe for more stories where patience, evidence, and the law finally make the bullies pay.